You're waking up to an inbox full of, fires to put out. You're going at 1,000 miles an hour from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. And that's not a great a recipe for mental health.
Now available. Awakening I Am, Internal Awareness in an AI Age audiobook, and our Victory Builders platform, which integrated system for founders who execute, is open. Links in the description. When we talk about what it means to be a conscious leader, especially in today's time, it's not just a new catchphrase. It is something that we've been working towards for a long time. But today's conversation I'm going to have with our guests when we bring them on, it's going to be centered around one of two things. One, how do we protect the authenticity of what it means to be a conscious leader and not move from this being something that is worked on internally, worked on without, to something that now becomes a catchphrase or becomes a new fad and a new wave. But real consciousness doesn't move in waves or with fads. Real consciousness comes from within. Just as leadership can be a skill that is developed, being mindful, a mindful leader, is a skill that can be developed. When we talk about conscious leadership, we talk about not the hard skills of leadership, the knowledge that you bring to the table, the industry that you work in. We talk about the softer side, the non-material side of you, the invisible you. And it really gets down to how do we make people feel when we stand before them, give our orders, and when we leave the room. My name is NaRon Tillman. This is another episode of Walk in Victory, where we sit you at the feet of the masters and have conversations to help you change your life. We challenge you emotionally, intelligently through all topics centered around some neuroscience, mindfulness, conscious leadership. And today's master is James. How are you, sir?
Great. I don't know that I call myself a master. Every time I hear that, I kind of look over my shoulder to see if someone else is joining. But but absolutely can resonate with a lot of what you just said.
Well, yeah, we'll get into what you've accomplished. Sure. Let's get into this topic. And the query is, what do we have to do to safeguard from this becoming like at one point, people only was going to yoga studios because of the yoga body. Remember we went through the whole yoga body fad? How do we save conscious leadership and that term conscious leadership from becoming just a catchphrase or something that looks other?
I don't think any one person can answer that question fully, but my perspective on it would be that if you have a sense of servant leadership, if you're someone who looks to think through the consequences, not just for the organization and the bottom line, but also your people and your team, and you find a way to not only provide value in terms of, we're going to get you a paycheck, we're going to get you, some upside if we hit our goals, but, more importantly, what are your career goals? I look back on, there's been multiple people that, I've worked with who, when you sit down and talk with them, they're like, I really want to do X, Y, Z. And it turns out that if you just position them to, be able to go in that direction within the organization, compensation becomes a little bit less important. Still matters, but that opportunity to feed their thirst for knowledge, their thirst for experience, and the ability to work with people that they enjoy working with, that's really, to me, it's a 360-degree view of, how do you benefit the organization? How do you protect the organization? And, being in the C-suite, what I've learned, or kind of against my will to an extent, is the reality that you have to manage up and down, especially when you have shareholders, then you have a team of people who rely on you, and you have to be that barrier that filters out the stress and drama happening in the boardroom and be able to, lead the team effectively and create something that's sustainable. Because if you're just out there demanding results without providing the groundwork for success, you're just going to end up burning out your team. You're going to end up constantly having to retrain and losing that institutional knowledge, so your corporate culture, all the things that make your company and your organization and your team amazing and thriving. You start to lose those things, or they become harder to hold on to.
I think that it was probably during the Occupy Wall Street movement where we started to have this real push towards having these conversations. From my perspective, I was already doing mindfulness and yoga and stuff like that. They were occupying, but they really didn't understand the language that they were asking for. And this leadership model that has been birthed because people stopped and really started to ask the question now points towards the internal, the way that we make each other feel, not just thinking about bottom line, not moving away from capitalism, but understanding that the day of greed over livelihood has to come to a head, and we have to have these conversations. When you hear the word conscious leader, what does that mean, and how does that resonate to you?
Yeah, I think it means different things to different people. I guess it's based on your perspective and your experiences and your lived experiences. But for me, it means, are you leading the organization in a direction? Are you looking for people to have better lives as a result of working with you? Or are you looking for people to come in for a few years, get some sort of experience, and then get out? And, those incentives or those goals, they overlap, because if somebody's with you for a few years and has an experience, you still want them to leave with good things to say, because it affects your ability to recruit in the future. So it's not that you don't care, but if your goal is to keep people, for decades, or help, individuals that you care about in the organization create generational wealth through the outcomes within the team, that's a totally different mindset of, how do we set you up for being able to take advantage of the upside, not just economically, but work-life balance? How do I support your ability to be there for your kids, for your hobbies, the things you care about in the community? How do I incentivize the company to give back to the things that you care about? So it becomes more and more of almost a mission of holistic life building, giving people the tools. You can't build people's lives for them, but you can make the tools available. You can, give them options that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And if, as a result of working with you and your team, that, they get those opportunities and they can look back and go, wow, that was a really cool thing. I wouldn't have been able to do X, Y, Z without having, done a chapter here or a big part of my life here. Then you're going to have an incredible upside on your balance sheet, as well as, your ability to recruit and retain the best talent.
Let's talk about your journey. How did you get here? What did that look like?
So I'm an entrepreneurial mutt. So basically, I did the obligatory entrepreneur thing, which is you drop out of college after 1 year. So, worked on a startup, and of course that blew up in not the best way. But, you learn through those bruises and scrapes the difference between, entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship. And so, coming out of that, it was a really cool project, but I realized I was really good at communicating with our team and our investors, especially in terms of like email communication. This was back in like 2013. So what I did to pay the bills was I started doing freelancing content writing. So a lot of ghostwriting for Wall Street Journal, Forbes, different, publications, but also more and more my content was being used for SEO. And I was like, what the hell is SEO? So, I started looking into this, and, the old saying of the people who know why work, have the people working for them that know how. And I said that backwards. The better way to say it is the people that know how work for those that know why. But the reality is, if you learn why your work's being used the way it's being used, you can move up the ladder a little bit more effectively. And so not only did I kind of learn to learn and earn, but also figure out how to build relationships, provide value. And, those earned relationships where, people don't have to give you the time of day. And they're either in love with you or they're in love with your position or title. And if they like you personally, you're going to go a little bit further than if they just like your position and title. So, anyways, through that journey, I ended up going in house at a marketing agency that was kind of loosely related to Disney. Then from there, ended up working with a personal injury marketing firm. So we dealt with all these lawyers. I must have done something absolutely horrible in a past life to deal with so many lawyers, but we did personal injury marketing, which is very competitive. These guys have big egos and they want to put their faces on buses and benches and billboards and want to be the first on Google and all those things. So that was an interesting space throughout the US and Canada we dealt with. And then from there, out of the blue, our marketing agency was totally absorbed by a med tech startup because they said, we really like what you do, but we don't want to just be a client. We want to bring you all into our, organization. So that led to this wild journey where I went in-house and I was initially writing all of the content, so all the website copy, the user manuals, the blog articles, basically anything that needed to be right gooder. That's what I did. And so from there, then as we grew as a company, I moved into the director of customer experience role, which was really focused on that post-sale. So the moment somebody became a customer, how do we make sure that we delight them? How do we retain them, prevent them from returning their product, but also get them to say good things about us? So, how do you build the support team in the organization around accomplishing those goals, both digitally and human? And then from there, all of a sudden, the founder of the company, or one of the main founders and the CEO of the company, passed away just abruptly. And so from there, you had this just really rocky period as a lot of people who were cashing checks, who were shareholders, suddenly were worried that those checks weren't going to show up anymore. And so they wanted absolute control. They wanted, there was a combination of ego and fear. And so you had this dynamic. And throughout that whole storm, I guess, I took over as chief operating officer and helped kind of right the ship for a little while. And things went well. I like to say that I'm tangentially responsible for about 100,000 men in America getting an erection without Viagra. So, doing the Lord's work. But
yeah, amen.
but, it was an interesting space, an interesting journey. And after a few years as in the C-suite, I left and moved to Denver. So, both in terms of work experience, but also in terms of like geographic area. I grew up in Virginia Beach, went to college in Ohio for that 1 year, and then moved to Orange County, then LA, then Scottsdale, and now Denver. So been all over the place geographically, built and maintained a company through COVID. That was interesting, and all the things that come with that. So a lot of successes, a lot of failures, a lot of teachable moments, but most importantly, a lot of amazing relationships. And so what I'm doing right now at Overlaying Venture Partners is I've brought together a team of people that I've known for more than a decade that I know their stuff, number one, but also are really trustworthy. And so we're really focused on trying to be kind of every business owner's best friend. Like, how do we take everything we learned that we know that works and bring that down to where it's not just hidden behind the Fortune 500s and their teams, where they have immense amounts of bodies and resources, but instead bringing that out and allowing everyone to access and benefit from it.
You now also go around helping your best friends
Yeah.
become more conscious. And I've taught class in Denver at a mindfulness retreat. Denver is a very mindful space.
Yeah, it's an incredible space where I think out of all the places I've lived, it's the most diverse in terms of viewpoints and in terms of fresh approaches, first principles thinking. Denver is very much a place where you can certainly find, the hippies, and you can find the Lenovo ThinkPad users, right? You get both of those in that world, and especially in Denver Tech Center, there's a really interesting mix. So really vibrant city, lots going on here, and plus you have access to some pretty cool rural areas in the Rockies right there. So really good balance of technology, civilization, and nature.
Yeah, yeah. Where did you get your your style. You win awards for speaking, and of course, when you're a writer, you learn how to articulate, so it goes hand in hand. But where did you get your mindful practice, and how did you begin to merge the mindfulness and all of the things that you do with your executive coaches, the executive coaching style with the conscious leader?
Yeah. So
Jumbled up a little bit, but I think you
no
got
worries. I
it.
got what you're going for. I know you've done a lot of these interviews back to back, and I know how that kind of all twists in your head. I can't imagine doing that and talking about the same thing over and over again, trying to be fresh and not trip over. I couldn't do it. So hats off to you. But so to back up a moment, so I have not personally won an award for speaking. However, I have won awards for my writing. And so I just want to be clear, I don't want to misrepresent anything about my background for sure. But, for me, the mindfulness piece of it, so 2 years ago when I exited out of Launch Medical, the crazy thing is you're living that life where you're traveling constantly, you're, on meetings back to back, you're waking up to an inbox full of, fires to put out. You're going at 1,000 miles an hour from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. And that's not a great mental health a recipe for mental health. So in that moment where I go from 1,000 miles an hour to zero, and I just have this quiet, this moment of like, okay, my phone's not ringing all of a sudden. I don't have to respond to all these emergencies. And it was very abrupt. It was just like it's like a light switch. And in that moment, I thought about, like, I'm in a position I have a lot more flexibility than I've ever had in any other chapter of my life. And so I have the ability to focus on what matters to me. And so the mindfulness component for me was really working on my mental health and saying, okay, it's time to like look under the hood and figure out like, have I been living in a healthy way? Obviously I eat too many cookies, but other than that, am I being okay? Am I being nice to my brain? And the answer was no. I was, when you're putting other people first, when you're putting the organization's goals first, when you're putting other things before your own needs, you end up just focusing on, okay, what's next? Okay, what's next? And you're never going to say, okay, am I okay? And so having that moment to kind of jolt myself and realize that like, hey, there's a whole lot more to than what's next. It's time to focus. And so yeah, in my journey, I got the chance to work with some amazing mental health professionals and kind of understand more about how my brain works. And so what I learned is, you have ADD, anxiety, depression, on the autism spectrum of all things. We didn't understand all of these things. And so working through that and learning how my brain works was really something that's allowed me to live a much more fulfilling and deeper life, but also at the same time as you're working on your mental health. And I think everybody has some degree of those things that I just mentioned. It's not black and white, it's a spectrum. But, as you work on those things, you start to also realize who are the people in your life that really care about you. I like to use the term chosen family, right? So, relationships are really important for work, but also more than anything, in terms of the people who really have your back. And so, I mentioned I focused on my mental health. I got to a place where I was really doing well. And I was like, okay, now I'm ready to figure out what's next on my chapter. I started taking the recruiters' calls, doing interviews and things like that. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, my chest started to hurt. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm having a heart attack. And thankfully that wasn't the case. But one of the things that is unique about me is, I was born in Guam on a Navy hospital, or at a Navy hospital that wasn't the most advanced in the world. And I was a preemie. So going through that process, I suppose, not that I personally remember much of it, but the challenges they had in terms of keeping me alive and dealing with that without all the tools necessary to deal with that in like an ICU environment. There's some lasting damage to my lungs and my GI. So the result of that, it was kind of like a ticking time bomb, right? And so I get to this point in my life, and all of a sudden I'm having these chest pain issues. And it's this issue of basically when I exhale, my trachea collapses. So there's weird things that happen with my valves. And the result of that is it traps air and fluid to a certain extent in my chest. And so every day I'm dealing with this chronic pain issue. And so it's like, I've dealt with the mental health. I've focused on these things that, like, I think I've set myself up for the next chapter to have this amazing, next adventure. And then all of a sudden my health takes a crap physically. And so the serendipitous part, though, is, I had just moved to Denver, not too long before. And everyone loves to say, well, was it the altitude? Was it the altitude? And it's like, no, I spent so much time up in Flagstaff, which is 2,000 feet higher. So it wasn't really an altitude thing. But we have National Jewish Hospital out here, which is one of the top respiratory research hospitals in the country. So again, I go from this place of like 1,000 miles to zero. And then, okay, I'm going to focus on my mental health. And I get to a place where I feel like I've dialed that in. And you never are done with that journey, but you dial it into where you're in a much better place. And then all of a sudden it's like a freight train hits you and it's like, cool, congratulations, here's your next prize. And so then it's like, okay, how do I deal with this? And it took me about a year to, between doing all these scans. I have a surgery coming up in a few weeks to work on some things. So, I mean, there's all these ongoing things that you balance, but at the same time, it's like, I thought I had this all wrapped up in my head. Like I had a really tight plan that was like perfect. I was going to go, take another executive role at one of these companies in DTC and, go from there. And it didn't work out for me. And I had to build around the limitations. So there's a place of like, okay, acceptance, like I can control what I can control, but I can't control what I can't control, which thankfully I already knew that from running organizations and dealing with all the drama that involves. But when you're doing it alone, in a sense, this isn't a team issue, this is a me issue. And you suddenly realize, like I said, your chosen family, the people who are in your circle, there are so many people that I kind of ignored along the way because they weren't really beneficial to me in my corporate life and in my career goals. But the people who really stepped up, many of them were people that I wouldn't have thought would be my people, in this chapter. And a lot of the people I thought would be my people didn't really step up or just weren't there or found excuses and reasons. And I get it. It's a lot more fun to be involved when things are going well. And so, yeah.
I'm sorry to cross
ahead.
cut you, but that's so funny that you would say that, because now as you're building this technology and using AI to help people, that's what the whole consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Because you're still saying, okay, you can make money, but because of your personal experience,
sure,
you're coming down with the mental health, feeling like you're at this Zen place, right? And now going through a personal life crisis.
Yeah.
And now this technology is here for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying, okay, I know individually what I'm going through.
Right.
So you can only imagine what executives are going through. They still want to make money, and they probably feel isolated, but you've been able to develop something that helped them to do both, and using the technology advances that are here for us all.
Yeah, I mentioned serendipity a moment ago. So, I move out to Denver. You got National Jewish out here, which is an incredible hospital. But then at the same time, it turns out that one of my best friends from Virginia Beach, we both made Eagle Scout together. In the time that I was doing operations and marketing, he happened to relocate out here years ago. And so we crossed paths, on Facebook. It's like, oh, holy crap, Jeff's out here. So we go and grab drinks and catch up. And, it's the classic story of like, oh, what have you been up to in the last 10 years? And so very different stories, though. Like my background, again, operations and marketing, his whole background was technology. He'd been in the AI and big data space going back the better part of a decade. And so, I'm sitting here going, wait a second, me know very much about this, me dumb sometimes. And so I'm like, tell me more, right? And so we start unpacking like what's happening with technology. And so about a year, coming up on just a year ago, we founded Overlaying, and for a variety of reasons. One, because we need to build something around my medical limitations, but also at the same time, we saw this coming, and by we, I mean Jeff, but I'll take credit for it. We saw this massive shift coming, and it was already happening behind the scenes. And so there's this rollout in tech that I've learned to appreciate. And whether you're talking about erectile dysfunction or organizational dysfunction, there's this rollout of technology where you have large organizations that have the budget to be the early adopter. they go in and start messing with it and they get ahead of it. And what happens, and people kind of skip this part in the entrepreneurial journey sometimes, especially if they're a small business. All the big guys, they early adopt, great, no big deal. Anybody could be an early adopter, but then they internalize and they figure out how to take what they're doing or what the tool they're using and build it and adapt it to their corporate culture, their needs, the way their systems work. And that's the step that's missing right now. You have all these people running around who are, they were experts in real estate last week and Bitcoin the month before that, and now they're suddenly AI experts. And it's like, that's, yeah, okay, you can use all these tools and more power to you, God bless. But if you're not integrating these solutions into something that's like a roadmap that maps your organization and your culture, that's a problem. Problem is all these people are renting their infrastructure, especially when it comes to AI. Imagine when you sell a business, you say to the person buying your business, hey, we have an Office 365 subscription. Cool. That doesn't make your company more valuable. No, it just doesn't. And that's what's happening with AI right now, is everybody's subscribing to all these different tools, and that's great. Nothing wrong with learning how to use the tools. But if you're not integrating that into a system that allows you to actually go into your data islands, pull that context for your organization and build it around your team, and it's not that expensive to do, but that's really where we came in was, through a lot of trial and error and trying to build other things on our own, we realized like there's this common roadblock we keep hitting, which is all of the technology out there. If we blend it all together, you end up with vendor lock-in. So you use vendor A to do something. Well, all of a sudden, vendor A says, hey, I'm not going to work with vendor C anymore. You have to buy that service from us instead. So expand your package with us and drop that other vendor, which sometimes is good, but more often than not is not great, because now you have to migrate everything over, invest more time into a new solution to add on to what you're doing and change how you're doing all the things that matter. And right now, AI is moving so quickly. And again, Jeff totally saw this coming. He was already working with petabytes of data in the insurance space and saw the actuarial side of it taking advantage of AI. This is a moment where if you're not using AI in your daily life, and this applies to everybody, you're screwed. Like you're done. You might as well go, pitch a tent on the beach. You're done. Like your options are limited. If you are using AI in your daily life, good for you. But are you using the latest? Are you learning about agentic AI versus, previous iterations, what it can do? Are you using the right AI tool for the right thing? And so most people, the answer is, well, kind of, doing the best I can, and God bless, that's awesome. But the organizations that are thriving right now are the ones who weren't necessarily the early adopters, because a lot of the early adopters I'm talking to, they're getting screwed over on their contracts because all of a sudden, when they brought all these different tools together and talking to each other, what happened was suddenly vendor A didn't want to do business with vendor C, and so now you've got to do everything under one roof or build your own system or whatever, so they're having to reinvest. But that cycle, that's normally a 5 to 10 year cycle. We've seen it in 1 year. It's bizarre. AI is so fast. And now that it's dreaming to a certain extent, and we can unpack that, there's so much more to how these systems work. And me being, a real dummy, and having Jeff, thankfully, in the back corner, being able to access all this information and access all these tools, we've been able to basically build out a system that not only can I understand, but I know it actually works when we roll it out, because it's just like AI silly putty. And it's something that when you go to exit, instead of saying, hey, I subscribe to this, you can say, hey, I have this AI infrastructure that we own. We have a license to use it in perpetuity. It's transferable, blah, blah, blah. So that suddenly massively changes the game in terms of if you're looking to exit and get out of your business, suddenly now you've got something that not only makes your life easier, but really pads your pocketbook on the way out and along the way too.
Yeah, so, and this is what conscious leadership look like, right? Because you brought A to the table. He brings B to the table. You take your knowledge and all of your leadership skills, but you start to think about the end user. You don't just bring a product to the market. You're thinking about the end user all the way down to purchase. All the way down to sell. You're saying, hey, if you do this, this is a solution. And it's not just about the bottom line. It's not that we're the best. It's not, you're mindful of the end user. You're mindful of your corporate values, your personal corporate values. You're mindful of your health. So this, I know we've been using the word serendipitous, but this is what the synergy, right? So when you're going through the move-in and the CEO over here and I lived over there, and you're going through all of these lived experiences, do you feel as if all of these lived experiences help prepare you for what you're doing right now? And where do you see in your imagination, as you talk about AI's imagination, um, yourself a year from now?
Yeah, so I was having lunch with my dad about, it was like 2 Christmases ago. We're sitting down, for the holidays, and this was not too long after I exited. And my dad's like, "Well, what's next?" And I go, "Dad, I can do anything." And he goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "Well, in the last 6 years, I've had a 20-year career. If you look at all the things that I got to deal with hands-on versus theoretical, if you look at the people that I know, the relationships I've built, and the ability to understand what it means to not only plan but deliver and have grace in the sense that the best plans aren't going to work out exactly as you planned, so you have to have some grace built in too. Those things, and then combining that with the understanding of my buddy Jeff and his AI background, and now which is quickly becoming my AI background in this chapter of our lives. you know I felt like, man, I'm the luckiest person in the world, and I still feel that way. The For a few different reasons, but what I go back to is, in this moment, I understand what it means to be a freelancer, what it means to be an entrepreneur, what it means to be an executive, what it means to be a mid-level, director, or even just a frontline person who, every one of those things are incredibly important. There's not one role in there that I mentioned that's superior to the other. It just means that you've got, more chips on the table in terms of responsibility and outcome, deliverables. So the thing I would say at the end is, like, of all that is, every moment in your life, my takeaway in this moment of life is progress is success. And that's what I think a lot of people forget, is they're so focused on, oh, I saw somebody on Instagram, out there, they're driving a Ferrari. Well, by the way, they rented that, but they're driving a Ferrari and they found this really great house. Well, that's an Airbnb. And so, all these things that, look shiny and glitter, that's not really what success looks like to me. To me, success looks like, when you wake up in the morning, are you working on something that you value? Are you building something for your future? For me, because I'm not going to be around forever, none of us are. I'm not going anywhere tomorrow, but we all have that expiration date on our milk jug, and so you have to think about that. And it's freeing. Steve Jobs used to say, the most freeing thing in the world is to know that you're going to die one day. It's like, okay, what's the worst that could happen? And I would add to that, some of the most stressful times in my life, and this might sound counterintuitive, but the most stressful moments of my life, it was like, I could always kill myself tomorrow. I don't want to, but, like, worst case scenario, like, I just pull the ripcord. Like, what are we talking about here, right? So, and your goal is,
bada bing,
yeah,
bada
your
boom.
goal is never to do that. That's not, you don't look forward to that. You don't plan that into your, 5-year plan of, like, okay, 5 years and one day I'm out. But you use that to free yourself from the anxieties that tie you down in the moment of, like, well, what if I fail? And some of the best entrepreneurs I know, we trade failure stories more than we trade success stories. And those are the things that really, allow for authenticity, in terms of communication, but also, real learned experiences that you just aren't going to get in a textbook.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate this conversation, James, and the way that you helped steer me to where I needed to go, because I did kind of mix up bias,
All
but
good.
we still got we got some great fruit out of this, and that's what life is about, making sure that you're prepared and to pivot and do what you have to do. Listen, everybody, all of James' information is in the bio. We don't ask you for Cash Apps, Venmos, or Apple Pays or any of those things, but we do ask that you support our guests. Follow them on social media, get to understand the company. And if you are an entrepreneur and you're listening to this, you need to own your tech. We talk about this often, me and my partner, about companies owning their tech stack and why that's important, because you can always build on it. And when you rely on, it's the same thing in marketing. When you rely on Facebook or Instagram, tomorrow they change the algorithm, you're like, oh, they're messing with me, right? No, your job is to cultivate an audience on their platform and bring them to your platform. Your job is to embrace AI and develop in-house. And that's what what James and his partner is doing. And they're doing so consciously. And they're not just conscious about the internal well-being, which is one thing. They also understand that you need to make a bottom line and you need to have an exit strategy. We're not in business to live forever. Hey, tomorrow may be the last day. We don't know what expiration date is on the milk carton. I'm always using that one. And finally, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe. Your likes, your shares, your subscriptions help us get these conversations into the ears of the people that need to hear them. If you're listening on a platform where you can leave a review, your review helps us get these conversations to the ears that need them. We've built a tech stack. Victory Builders is here. We've looked at the market and we're looking out for the customer. We've put everything in one platform, your CRM, your emails, your funnels, your landing pages, website, everything that you need under one roof, so that you don't have to worry about price coming out here on the 1st and another one on the 15th. We've combined all of these things and we're constantly building, and we want you to participate. We're not selling price point, we're selling production. We want you to be productive and walk with us in victory. Enjoy the rest of your day. Don't make no excuses. Walk in victory. Peace.